My name is Claire Bennett, and on the night of my 25th birthday, the two people I had called my parents for my entire life invited me to a restaurant I could never have afforded on my own. At first, I thought they were finally doing something special. I was wrong. By the end of that dinner, they would tell me a secret they had hidden for 25 years. A secret they believed would completely destroy me. What they didn't know was that I had uncovered a few secrets of my own months earlier, and while they were preparing to remove me from their lives forever, the people connected to my past were sitting much closer than they realized. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand how I grew up. The restaurant was elegant, quiet, and far more expensive than any place my parents had ever taken me before. That alone felt strange. My mother, Victoria Bennett, wasn't the type of person who spent money without expecting something in return. She carefully calculated everything, every favor, every gift, every act of kindness. If she paid for something, there was usually a reason behind it. My father, Richard, sat across from me looking unusually nervous. The atmosphere felt less like a birthday celebration and more like a meeting where someone was about to deliver bad news. I noticed small details immediately. No birthday decorations, no cake, no wrapped gift waiting beside the table, nothing that suggested this evening was actually about celebrating me. The entire setup felt rehearsed, as if both of them had spent days preparing for a conversation they already knew by heart. I smiled politely and tried to ignore the growing feeling in my stomach. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The truth is, birthdays had never been important in our family. When I was little, my birthday usually meant a supermarket cupcake and a single candle, nothing more. Meanwhile, other relatives received elaborate parties, decorations, and expensive gifts. As a child, I didn't understand why. As I got older, I stopped asking. It seemed easier that way. I learned very early that expecting less prevented disappointment. So I became the easy child, the quiet child, the child who never asked for too much. When I turned 18, I left home with little more than a few bags and a determination to build my own future. Nobody paid for college. Nobody helped with rent. Nobody offered financial support. I worked during the day and studied at night. Every achievement I earned belonged entirely to me, and despite everything, I was proud of that. By 25, I had built a respectable career and a stable life. From the outside, everything looked successful. But there was one question I had carried for years. Why had I always felt like an outsider inside my own family? The answer began revealing itself months before that birthday dinner. Small changes started happening. Phone calls became shorter. Family invitations became less frequent. Group conversations suddenly revolved around the importance of real family. The word appeared everywhere. Blood. Blood relatives. Blood connections. Blood family. At first, I ignored it. Then I started noticing a pattern. The distance wasn't accidental. It was coordinated. Something was happening behind the scenes. Something nobody wanted me to know. Then one evening, my mother called. Her voice sounded unusually warm, almost affectionate. That alone made me suspicious. She invited me to celebrate my 25th birthday properly, a phrase she had never used before. As soon as the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment thinking about everything that had happened over the previous year, the strange behavior, the missing invitations, the repeated references to blood relatives, and the documents hidden inside a folder sitting in my closet. Documents that had already changed my life. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. What my parents didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had started searching for answers. And those answers had led me somewhere neither of them expected. Somewhere that would completely change what happened at that restaurant. That night, as I drove toward the dinner reservation, one thought repeated in my mind. Sometimes the people who try hardest to erase your place in their story are the same people terrified you'll discover the truth. And very soon, the truth was about to walk into the room. 6 months before that birthday dinner, I made a decision I had been avoiding for years. I wanted answers, not guesses, not family stories. The truth. For most of my life, I had learned to live with questions that nobody seemed willing to answer. Why did I always feel different? Why did every family gathering leave me feeling like a guest instead of a daughter? Why did certain relatives treat me like I belonged and others act as if I had merely been tolerated? At first, I expected the search to lead nowhere. But within weeks, everything changed. A letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful, nervous, almost as if the person writing it had spent years imagining this moment. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a message from a woman named Sarah Hale. She explained that many years ago, she had made a decision that haunted her every day afterward. She wrote that not a single birthday had passed without wondering where I was, whether I was happy, whether I was safe, whether I had ever thought about finding her. I read the letter 3 times, then 4, then 5. Every sentence felt impossible to ignore, but one line stayed with me longer than the rest. I never stopped hoping I would see you again. Nobody had ever written words like that to me before. Not once. For 25 years, I had become used to feeling optional, replaceable, temporary. Yet here was someone I had never met telling me I had mattered all along. A few days later, another document arrived. This one wasn't emotional. It was official. And buried inside it was information that completely changed how I viewed my family. What began as a simple search into my past suddenly exposed something far bigger, something connected to my late grandmother. My grandmother had always been the only person in my family who treated me differently. Not differently in a bad way. Differently in a loving way. She listened. She remembered things I told her. She called for no reason other than wanting to hear my voice. After she passed away, I missed her more than anyone else. Now I was beginning to understand why. The records revealed that she had quietly made arrangements years earlier. Arrangements nobody had ever mentioned. The more documents I reviewed, the more pieces started falling into place. Suddenly, the strange behavior from my parents made sense. The coldness, the distance, the sudden obsession with blood relatives. It wasn't random. It never had been. There was a reason they wanted me pushed to the edge of the family. And that reason had a deadline. My 25th birthday. The exact birthday they suddenly wanted to celebrate. I remember sitting alone in my apartment that night, surrounded by paperwork. The room was silent. But my mind wasn't. Every memory from childhood looked different now. Moments that once felt confusing suddenly became clear. The cheap birthdays. The unequal treatment. The endless reminders that I should be grateful for whatever I received. It all fit together. And the more I understood, the calmer I became. Not angry. Not yet. Just prepared. A few weeks later, I met Sarah for the first time. We chose a small restaurant halfway between our cities. Neither of us knew what to expect. She looked nervous when she walked through the door. Honestly, so was I. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. And then I noticed something strange. She had my eyes. The same smile. The same habit of looking away when emotions became overwhelming. It was like seeing pieces of myself reflected back for the first time. The conversation lasted hours, yet somehow it felt too short. I learned I had a younger half-brother named Daniel. I learned I had a grandmother who had been hoping to meet me for years. Most importantly, I learned something I had never truly experienced before. Being wanted, not needed, not tolerated, wanted. Nobody asked me for money. Nobody expected anything. Nobody treated me like an obligation. They were simply happy I existed. That feeling was almost harder to process than the truth itself. Over the following months, we stayed in contact. Phone calls turned into visits. Visits turned into family dinners. Slowly, I began discovering what genuine connection actually felt like. Then my birthday invitation arrived, and everything clicked. I finally understood why my parents had suddenly become interested in celebrating me. The dinner wasn't a gift. It was a performance. A carefully planned conversation they intended to control. What they didn't realize was that I already knew far more than they imagined. I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into a room where everyone else thought they held the advantage. The night before the dinner, I made 3 phone calls. The first call was to a lawyer. The second was to someone who had become very important to me. And the third call set in motion the moment that would change everything. By the time I hung up, every detail had been arranged. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. My parents were already waiting. Both smiled when I approached, but their smiles looked rehearsed, like actors preparing for the opening scene of a play. I sat down, ordered a drink, and waited, because I knew eventually they would reveal what they had really invited me there to hear. What I didn't know was just how cruel they were willing to be when that moment finally arrived. The waiter had barely taken our orders when my mother decided it was time to begin. She exchanged a quick glance with my father. A silent signal, the kind people develop after years of practicing the same conversation. My stomach tightened. Not because I was afraid, because I finally knew what was coming. My mother folded her hands neatly on the table and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile people wear when they believe they control the outcome. "Claire," she began softly, "there are some things we've kept from you." There it was, the opening line, the beginning of the speech they had clearly rehearsed dozens of times. I stayed quiet. The less I spoke, the more they talked. And tonight, I wanted them talking. My father cleared his throat but avoided eye contact. That alone told me everything. Whatever happened next wasn't his idea, but he wasn't going to stop it either. He never stopped anything. My mother reached into her handbag and removed a thick envelope. She placed it carefully on the table between us. Then she slid it toward me. "Before you read this," she said, "you need to understand that we did what we thought was best." Whenever someone starts a sentence that way, the truth is usually ugly. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "Go ahead," she said. I opened it slowly. Inside were several documents. The first page explained everything. I was adopted. Legally. Officially. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the words. Not because I was shocked. I had already discovered that months earlier. What shocked me was how proud my mother seemed while saying it. Almost relieved. As if she had finally removed a burden. I looked up. Neither of them spoke. They were waiting. Waiting for tears. Waiting for anger. Waiting for me to break. Instead, I calmly turned another page. The silence stretched. My mother shifted uncomfortably. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Finally, she continued. "We didn't think you should learn this from anyone else." A lie. Several years too late, but I let her continue. My father still hadn't said a word. He looked like a man sitting through a storm. He knew was wrong but lacked the courage to leave. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The sentence I would never forget. My mother leaned forward and lowered her voice. "We cared for you all these years because it was the right thing to do." The words sounded kind, until she kept talking. But now circumstances have changed. I felt my pulse slow. Not increase. Slow. The way it does when you already know the ending. "We've made certain decisions regarding the future of this family." There was that word again. Family. A word she only used when she wanted something. She took a breath, then finally said it. "We don't believe it makes sense for you to remain involved moving forward." The restaurant seemed strangely quiet. Even the background music felt distant. My father closed his eyes briefly. Still silent. Still choosing comfort over honesty. I watched my mother carefully. The confidence in her face fascinated me. She genuinely believed she was delivering the final blow. She thought this conversation would leave me devastated. She thought she held all the power. Then she made her biggest mistake. She kept talking. "We've spent years supporting you." Supporting me? I had paid my own tuition, my own rent, built my own career, bought my own furniture, created my own life. But facts rarely matter to people protecting a story. they've told themselves for decades. We sacrificed a lot, she continued. And frankly, we don't owe you anything else. There it was. The truth, not hidden anymore, not softened, not disguised. For the first time all evening, she was being honest. Dot nodded slowly. Not because I agreed, because I wanted her to keep going. And she did. We have responsibilities to our real family. Real family. The words landed exactly as she intended, like a knife. The problem was she had no idea. I'd already stopped bleeding months ago. Across the table, my father finally spoke. Maybe we could say this differently. His voice sounded weak, uncertain, almost apologetic. My mother's eyes snapped toward him instantly. The warning was obvious, and just like always, he retreated. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything said before. Then my mother produced another document. This one she placed directly in front of me. Beside it, she set a pen. The gesture looked innocent. It wasn't. Just sign this, she said, acknowledging that you've been informed. I looked down. The moment I started reading, I nearly laughed, because I recognized the language immediately. This wasn't an acknowledgement. It was protection. Protection for them. A carefully written document designed to limit future challenges. They wanted my signature before I had time to think, before I could ask questions, before I could fight back. The problem was, I had already been thinking for 6 months, and unlike them, I came prepared. I left the pen exactly where it was, untouched. My mother frowned. Claire? I smiled politely, the first genuine smile of the evening, and for the first time, I noticed uncertainty appear in her eyes, because she was finally starting to realize something wasn't going according to plan. What she didn't know was that the real surprise of the evening hadn't happened yet, and only a few tables away, the people who were about to change everything were already waiting. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. My mother stared at the untouched pen. My father stared at the tablecloth, and I sat there calmly, watching the confidence slowly drain from both of them. The silence made my mother uncomfortable. People like her depend on control, and control disappears the moment a script stops working. Claire, she said again, forcing a smile, this doesn't need to become difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult? She had invited me to my own birthday dinner to remove me from the family. Yet somehow I was the one making things difficult. I folded my hands and leaned back slightly. Interesting, I said. Her smile tightened. What is? The fact that you think I'm surprised. The words landed harder than I expected. My father's head immediately lifted. My mother's expression froze. For the first time all evening, neither of them looked prepared. What do you mean? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. I've learned something valuable over the years. Silence makes people reveal more than questions ever will. And right now, both of them were revealing plenty. My father looked nervous. My mother looked worried. Worried wasn't a look I had ever seen on her face before. Then she made another mistake. She pushed. Claire, if someone has been filling your head with ideas... I interrupted her. No one filled my head with anything. The temperature at the table seemed to change instantly. The confidence she had arrived with was slipping. Fast. I reached beside my chair and lifted a plain manila folder. The same folder I had carried into the restaurant. The same folder my father had been staring at all evening. The moment he saw it, the color left his face. That reaction told me everything. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. My mother noticed too. What is that? She asked. I looked directly at my father. That's actually a better question for him. My father swallowed hard. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered all the years he had watched things happen without saying a word. All the birthdays, all the holidays, all the moments he could have spoken and chose silence instead. Sympathy disappeared quickly. My mother turned toward him. Walter? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Now she looked genuinely confused. For the first time that evening, she wasn't controlling the conversation. She was trying to catch up to it. I opened the folder slowly. Not dramatically, not angrily, just carefully. Inside were several documents. Documents that had completely changed my understanding of my life. And documents neither of them expected me to possess. I placed the first page on the table, then another, then another. My mother leaned forward immediately. Her eyes moved across the pages. At first, nothing happened. Then everything happened. I watched realization spread across her face, the way a storm moves across a horizon. Slow, then all at once. Her breathing changed. Her hands became still, and for the first time in my entire life, she looked afraid. "What is this?" she whispered. I didn't answer. The documents spoke well enough on their own. My father already understood. That much was obvious. His shoulders had collapsed. The fight had left him before it even began. Meanwhile, my mother continued reading. Again and again, as if a second reading might somehow produce a different result. It didn't. The words remained exactly the same. The truth remained exactly the same. And the future she thought belonged to her was disappearing line by line. Finally, she looked up. Her face had gone completely pale. "Where did you get these?" There was no anger in her voice anymore. Only panic. I smiled calmly. "That's not the important question." She stared at me, then at the papers, then back at me. For the first time, she understood she wasn't holding the winning hand. She never had been. The entire evening had been built around a single assumption, that I knew nothing. That assumption had just collapsed. Across the table, my father finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew?" I looked at him. 6 months. The words hit him like a truck. His eyes closed briefly. 6 months. 6 months of preparation. 6 months of research. 6 months of understanding exactly what they planned to do. And 6 months of making sure it wouldn't work. My mother pushed her chair back slightly. She looked shaken. And not because she cared about me, because she cared about what the documents meant. And what they meant was simple. The game was over. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of apologizing, instead of admitting the truth, she changed tactics. Instantly. Like flipping a switch. Her face softened. Her voice became warm, almost emotional. "Claire," she said gently, reaching for my hand. "We're still your family." I looked down at her hand. The same hand that 20 minutes earlier had been trying to erase me from her life. Now it suddenly wanted connection. Funny how quickly people rediscover family when circumstances change. I didn't take her hand. The rejection hit harder than any speech ever could. And that was when I realized something. The most important part of this evening wasn't sitting at our table. It was sitting somewhere else in the restaurant, waiting patiently, exactly as planned. A few tables behind us, the people who had never asked me for anything, the people who wanted me before they knew whether I could give them anything at all. And in just a few moments, my parents were going to meet them. I stood up slowly, not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly, the way someone stands when a conversation has already ended. My mother noticed immediately. "Claire, sit down." Her voice was sharp now. The warmth had disappeared. The mask was slipping. I picked up my folder and looked at her. For years, that voice would have worked. For years, I would have sat down, apologized, explained myself, tried to keep the peace. But something had changed. I no longer needed permission to leave. "I'm not finished talking to you," she said. I almost smiled. The irony was unbelievable. She had spent my entire life making sure I never truly had a place in her world. Now she was upset that I was walking out of it. My father looked exhausted, older somehow, like the weight of every silent choice he'd ever made had finally landed on his shoulders all at once. I turned away from the table, then stopped. Not because of them, because it was finally time. "My real family is sitting 3 tables behind you." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mother's eyes narrowed. What did you just say? I repeated it, calmly. My real family is sitting 3 tables behind you. This time the words hit hard. Confusion crossed her face first, then disbelief, then fear. Slowly she turned around. My father followed, and 3 tables behind them sat the people who had quietly changed my life. Sarah, Daniel, and Eleanor. The family I had spent months getting to know. The family who had never once asked me for anything. The family who had shown up simply because they wanted me there. Sarah was the first to notice me standing. Her entire face lit up instantly. Not because of money, not because of documents, not because of inheritance, because she was happy to see me. That simple, that genuine. And suddenly every person in the restaurant seemed to understand something important. The people at table 9 looked like family. The people at my parents' table looked like strangers. My mother's face went completely white. She stared at Sarah, then at me, then back at Sarah again, comparing features. Eyes, smile, expressions, searching desperately for a mistake. There wasn't one. The resemblance was impossible to miss. And I watched the exact second she understood. The woman sitting behind her wasn't a threat. She was the truth. Sarah slowly stood up. She didn't look angry. She didn't look victorious. She simply looked protective, like someone prepared to stand beside a person she loved. Daniel stood next. Then Eleanor. All 3 waiting. All 3 smiling. Not one of them said a word. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. The room had grown unusually quiet. Nearby diners pretended not to stare. Failed completely. Even the waiters seemed frozen. Everyone could feel something important happening. My mother rose from her chair suddenly. "Claire!" Her voice echoed across the room. Heads turned immediately. She didn't care. Control was gone. And people who depend on control rarely lose it gracefully. After everything we did for you, there it was. The real argument. Not love. Not family. Not loss. A transaction. Everything they did. Everything they paid. Everything they believed they were owed in return. Across the restaurant, Sarah's expression changed. Not angry. Heartbroken. As if hearing those words confirmed every fear she'd carried for 25 years. "We gave you everything," my mother shouted. And I noticed something important. She kept saying gave. Never loved. Never cared. Never cherished. Only gave. Because deep down, even she knew the difference. The restaurant had become completely silent now. Nobody was pretending anymore. Everyone was watching. My father remained seated. He didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. He simply sat there staring at the table. A man who had spent a lifetime choosing the easiest path and who had finally reached the end of it. I walked away. 1 step, then another, then another. 15 feet, 3 tables, 25 years. That was all the distance between the life I had survived and the life waiting for me. When I reached table 9, Sarah opened her arms, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hesitate. I hugged her. The moment felt strangely ordinary. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just right. Like something that should have happened years ago. Then Eleanor smiled and pulled out an empty chair. A 4th chair. My chair. The chair they had quietly reserved all evening, even though the reservation had only been for 3 people. I looked at it, then at them, confused. Daniel laughed softly, and Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We always hoped you'd sit with us one day." I couldn't speak. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak, because nobody had ever saved a seat for me before. Not really. Then Sarah touched my hand and said the words that would stay with me forever. "We saved you a place." And at that moment, I realized something. Family isn't the people who keep score. Family isn't the people who calculate your value. Family isn't the people who love you only when you're useful. Family is the people who leave a chair open, even when they don't know if you'll ever arrive. The moment I sat down at table 9, the world behind me stopped feeling important. For the first time all evening, I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I wasn't calculating their next move. I wasn't preparing for impact. I was just there. Sarah gently slid the cake closer to me. A single slice. One candle. Nothing extravagant. Nothing staged. Just a quiet celebration of a moment I didn't fully understand how to feel. Make a wish, Daniel said softly. I looked at the candle, and honestly, I couldn't think of anything, because everything I had ever wanted in that moment was already sitting with me. So I didn't wish for anything. I simply closed my eyes and blew out the candle. Behind me, I could still hear my mother's voice faintly rising. Not words anymore, just sound. Frustration breaking into something less controlled. My father said nothing. He didn't follow. He didn't stop me. He just stayed there, exactly where he had always been. In the middle, between truth and comfort, and choosing comfort every single time. Sarah noticed me listening. She didn't ask me to turn around. She just placed her hand over mine. You don't have to look back, she said gently. And for the first time in my life, I didn't. The noise behind us slowly faded into the background of the restaurant, like a storm moving far away. Not because it stopped, but because I was no longer standing in it. Minutes passed. Maybe 10, maybe less. Time felt different now. Lighter. Daniel broke the silence first. So, he said carefully, that went better than expected. A small laugh escaped me, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Everything about this night was absurd. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. We weren't sure you'd actually come to us, she admitted. That sentence hit harder than anything my parents had said all night, because it wasn't an accusation. It wasn't pressure. It was fear. The fear of someone who had hoped for something too long. I didn't know I had a place to come to, I said quietly. Sarah squeezed my hand. You always did, she replied. My throat tightened, not from sadness, from recognition. Something I had never been given before was happening right in front of me. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, the kind that comes from no longer needing to fight. Behind us, chairs scraped again. Footsteps. My mother's voice carried across the room one last time. This isn't over, but it already was. Not legally, not financially, not on paper, but in every way that mattered. It was over. I didn't turn around. Neither did anyone at my table. We just stayed where we were, together. For a while, nobody spoke. Then Sarah reached into her bag and placed something on the table. A small photograph. It was old, faded at the edges. A child in a hospital blanket. Me. I stared at it for a long moment. I kept this, she said quietly. Every year. I didn't realize I was crying until Daniel looked away to give me space. No dramatic breakdown, no collapse. Just quiet tears I didn't try to stop. Because for the first time, they weren't from pain. They were from understanding. Eleanor stood up suddenly. We should get you home, she said gently. Home? That word felt strange, but not wrong. As we gathered our things, I finally glanced over my shoulder. My parents were still there, sitting, not talking anymore, not fighting, just losing. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, the way most things end in real life. I turned back before my thoughts could pull me in, and walked out. Outside, the night air felt different, cooler, softer, like the world had reset itself without asking permission. Sarah walked beside me, Daniel ahead, Eleanor behind. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't walking alone. As we stepped into the night together, I realized something simple. Not everything that breaks you stays broken. Sometimes, it just makes room for something better.